We're almost there to start. Right. It's 9 p.m.
Okay. Okay, that it's 9 p.m.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Kian will do our opening remarks.
Good evening to everyone and magandang umaga sa mga taga Pilipinas. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to our first collaboration of the Philippine Medical Association of Metro Washington, D.C., the Philippine Nurses Association of Metro D.C., and the Philippine Nurses Association in America. Before anything else, I want to acknowledge the work of all the organizers. We prepared a program which we all will be learning from. It is great to work with this amazing group, and I hope this is only the beginning of our work together. 2020 has been a difficult year for all of us, and we have all seen our patients get sick and pass away. It has affected our loved ones and a number of our colleagues. As healthcare workers, we have experienced the brunt of this pandemic. And as Filipino healthcare workers, not only in the United States, but definitely in the Philippines and globally, our burden is even greater as we are overrepresented in this field. We finally let a sigh of relief when the COVID vaccines came. It has been 5 to 6 months now. Millions of doses have been given and received, but the work is not yet done. We are not even halfway there. So we need to keep on pushing this train to our goal of herd immunity. And this is why we are doing this. This is why, as organizations dedicated to health, we have prepared this evening so we can do our part in educating our community and keeping it healthy. Maraming salamat po. Aida?
Ida, you're muted.
My name is Ida Imperio. I'm the chair of Education Committee of the Philippine Nurses Association of Metropolitan DC. And in collaboration with the PMA Metro DC, we also have the Philippine Nurses Association of America and Philippine Nurses Association of America Foundation as co-sponsors for this webinar. And I just want to go over quickly the survey results. If you all remember, we asked you when you registered some of the questions. And we, as far as at 5 o'clock this evening, we have 110 registrants. And so we have a total of 110. And the people, one of the questions we asked was how many of you, if you are vaccinated or not. So our data showed that 90% of the registrants are vaccinated, and 10%, which is about 11 respondents, were non-vaccinated. And the reasons for not being vaccinated, no vaccines are available, and most of them came from the Philippines, the respondents. Medical reasons, there were two who said it's medical reasons. Is scared of side effects, only one. Severe allergy, one. Is experimental shots, which destroys our natural immune. If it's a vaccine, are we supposed to protect us? Why do we have to wear a mask? And one person responded to that. Now, one more question. Would you recommend the vaccine? And 107 people, respondents said yes, which is 97%, and no, we won't recommend it, is 3%, which is 3 people. Oh, hold on, sorry. I just want to go over with the program of objectives. Oh, the ANA to American Nurses Association vaccine survey, which was done in March to April of 2021, there were 4,554 respondents. 408 of them, which is 8.9%, were identified as Asians. Out of 408 Asians, 50% are Filipinos. The vaccination rate among Asians is 89.4%, and this is the first disaggregated data for Filipino American nurses. Our program objectives, at the end of this webinar, the participants will be able to discuss the vaccine development process and types of vaccines available, identify some of the reasons or factors contributing to vaccine hesitancy, distinguish the most common myths from facts about COVID-19 vaccines, and describe the different strategies for addressing and overcoming vaccine hesitancy. And just to go over some Zoom instructions, your microphone will be muted by the host, and type your question at the chat feature of Zoom found at the bottom of your Zoom app for the chat master to see. This is a professional event. No distracting images or movements on your background. This program will be recorded. No contact hours will be awarded, and the speakers have declared no conflict of interest. And now Joy will introduce our speakers.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy Arellano, and I'm one of the members of the organizing committee. And it is my pleasure to introduce our dynamite speakers for tonight. Let's start with Dr. Cathy Ferrer. She is one of the attending physician, pediatric hospital medicine, and infectious disease divisions at Children's National Hospital. Education lead for its Global Health Initiative. She's the clinician for the Children's National Special Immunology Clinic, caring for children with perinatally and horizontally acquired HIV. Previously served as the medical director of the Baylor College of Medicine, Bristol Myers Squibb Children's Clinical Center of Excellence in Lesotho, where she assisted with a scale-up pediatric HIV care and treatment for the country. When the COVID epidemic hit in March 2020, she led the occupational health response at Children's National Hospital. She led a multidisciplinary team who oversaw the triage, testing, isolation, quarantining of Children's National Hospital employees, and was an integral part in the COVID vaccine rollout in Washington, D.C. Our next speaker is Ms. Kath Graham. She's a graduate from Chamberlain College of Nursing, occupational health nurse, and operating room nurse at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. She's also the COVID-19 response nurse and member of the COVID response team, providing COVID vaccines, performing employee testing, and telephone triage for symptoms and exposure at Children's National Hospital, Washington, D.C. She's a member of the AORN and has 13 years of healthcare experience, gaining insight from a variety of fields, including dialysis and telemetry. And last but not least, let me introduce Dr. Ramon Moreno, straight directly from Cagayan de Oro, Philippines. She's a graduate doctor of medicine from Cebu Doctors College of Medicine, Cebu City, had his residency at Northern Mindanao Regional Training Hospital, Cagayan de Oro City, Philippines. And recently, he assumed the Chief of Hospital position at the J.R. Borja General Hospital, same Cagayan de Oro City, Philippines. He was also the immediate Chief Medical Professional Staff, Chairman, Department of Medicine, Northern Mindanao Medical Center, which is the biggest hospital in Region 10 area in Mindanao. He has been very active in the community, medical missions, Adapt a Barangay, and mangrove tree planting, and Northern Mindanao Lifeline charities. Let us all welcome them. Thank you.
And now, Dr. Ferrer.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, now let me know, did that work?
No, there.
There we go. Perfect. Well, thank you, Joy, very much for that very generous and kind introduction. And thank you, Ida and Dr. Keown for putting this together. This is incredibly relevant for this time in the world. And so I'm just going to jump right into it. So I'm respectful of your time. I know it's quite late here on the East Coast and likely in the middle of rounds in the Philippines. And so I'll go through my objectives. Really, we'll start off fairly technical. I'll review how COVID vaccines work, as well as the vaccine development process, which ensures that approved vaccines are safe and efficacious. And then we'll also touch base on various characteristics of the different vaccines available here and also in the Philippines. And lastly, I'll draw on both my and Kat's on-the-ground experience with shaping the COVID vaccination program for our institution here in Washington, D.C. at Children's National. And so this is what has been responsible for our past year of chaos and catastrophe, really. This is an electron microscope photo of the virus. It's only 60 to 300 nanometers in diameter, and it's caused quite a bit of havoc. And as you can see, these spike proteins, that's what gives it its name, corona. So looks like a sun, really. And this isn't the first time, though, that coronavirus has affected the global stage. If you remember, in 2003, there was SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and that caused thousands of cases in over 25 countries and hundreds of deaths. MERS, which is Middle East respiratory syndrome, was in 2012. That was far more lethal than SARS and also hit about 26 countries, but again, mostly in the Middle East. And then in 2019, we identified SARS-CoV-2 is what it's called, the novel coronavirus. It's different than its predecessors, but far more contagious, obviously causing the global pandemic that we're in today. And so this is just a quick slide to show the impact and scope of COVID around the world and where we've been. This is the 7-day average, as you can see, of COVID cases worldwide over the past 70 weeks. We've really been in this. I know that Kat and I started our very first employee who was diagnosed with COVID was on March 15th. I will not forget that day. And that's when essentially I was voluntold to then be in charge of the occupational health response for Children's National. But as you can see, worldwide, 158 million cases and 3.2 million deaths. Again, if you look at it by country, the United States has not done very well at all containing this epidemic. Before India held the highest record for the most number of cases on a daily basis. And now let's break it down to more specifically the countries that are of interest to us. I heard that there are some participants that are from Canada and Australia. I'm going to give a call out to my cousin, Mylene Lorenzo, who's an anesthesiologist in Australia. And as you can see, the United States did not do well at all. We did the worst out of everybody, right? 32 million cases, 1 million in the Philippines, 1 million in Canada, 29,000 in Australia. I think Australia is the place to be. As you can see, that's in terms of cases. When you look at total deaths, again, United States, 581,000 deaths. Philippines, 18,000, doing better than the US. Canada, doing even better, 24,662, and Australia, 910. They don't even report per 100,000. And so now specifically looking at the United States, though, you know, this is our overall curve and our trajectory. So even though we did horrible and terrible with infection control measures, masking, not good at it, and clearly lockdowns, we were not very good at that either. The US performed better when it came to vaccines, and that's really been the reason for this now steep decline in number of new reported cases and the way that we've been able to continue to flatten the curve and hopefully keep it flattened. We now have about 46% of the population vaccinated with at least one dose, 35% fully vaccinated, and this number will go up significantly now that the FDA just yesterday approved the Pfizer vaccine for those who are 12 and older. Again, as many things health related, major disparities exist in the world, right? So countries that can afford vaccines, they have secured it for their populations. And so as I mentioned, the US vaccination rate is 46% with one vaccine. The Philippines is 1.8%. And I believe Canada is about 40%. And because Canada adopted the approach of the UK in terms of giving more people first doses and lagging behind the second doses, their fully vaccinated rate is actually, what was reported in the New York Times, was only 3.4%.
Whoa. Wow.
And so in terms of the trends, so now we actually have quite a large supply here in the United States. That the number of vaccines administered daily is decreasing steadily. As you've heard in the news, states are actually ordering less vaccine because they don't have the demand that we had previously. The people who want it here have gotten it, and now we're trying to convince those who have been hesitant or cautious to stop waiting and go ahead and get vaccinated. I know that I'm speaking to the choir because 90% of us on this webinar are vaccinated, and 97% said they would even recommend the vaccination to someone else. But in the end, as Dr. Keown mentioned, getting everyone vaccinated will contribute to our collective immunity, to our herd immunity, and really enhance our ability and facilitate our ability to return and remain in a state of normalcy. So what vaccines are out there? How many are out there? The New York Times, again, as a source of a lot of my slides, they have a great vaccine tracker. This really shows how many vaccines are in the pipeline, right? So those that are being tested for safety, dosage, efficacy, and those that have been approved. As you can see, over 130 vaccines have been developed in the past year, and that is essentially unprecedented. So here's a list of the leading vaccines. Right, so again, typically the US FDA has given emergency use authorization to Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. So we have the 3 vaccines here. And the Philippine Regulatory Drug Agency, I believe, has given approval to AstraZeneca, of course, and also to Sinovac is there as well. Many of my cousins have gotten Sinovac. And then I think one of the newer ones is this Gamaleya. It's also known as Sputnik 5. This is one of the Russian viruses, Russian vaccines. Now the WHO has also approved certain vaccines. And the reason this is significant, they did Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and then just last week they authorized Sinopharm. And so Sinopharm is the first non-Western vaccine to be approved by the WHO. This is significant because this then gives countries access to COVAX. COVAX is a multilateral body that basically is mission is to ensure vaccine equity and get vaccines to low-income, middle-income countries. And so this graphic I found online, and it really depicts the different types of COVID vaccine and how they work. From the previous slide, you could see they all have different platforms in terms of how they elicit the immune response. And so various vaccines use different technology platforms to do the same thing, really, right? To elicit an immune response in the vaccinated person so that when a vaccinated person is infected, they don't get sick or they don't get sick enough to die, be hospitalized, or have severe infection. Vaccines also protect against symptomatic infection to varying degrees, and data is now coming out that vaccinated individuals are less likely to transmit the virus also. So how do the vaccines do this? And so this is the slide that really looks at the different types of vaccines and how they work. These ones, the viral vector and the RNA vaccines, that's novel technology in terms of they've newly been applied to the vaccine domain. So the technology for both viral vectors and for RNA has been around for decades, but it's the first time that they're applying it to vaccines. And then whole virus and protein subunit type vaccines, those have been around for much longer and are typically our conventional way of developing vaccines. So that's sort of our tried and true technology. So which vaccines use which technology platforms? From the previous slide, the viral vector, the newer ones is the AstraZeneca, Janssen, Gamaleya, and CanSino. We know the newest ones that have never ever been approved before are Pfizer and Moderna. And then the sort of old tried and true ones are Sinopharm, Sinovac, Bharat, which is an Indian manufacturer, and then Novavax as well. And essentially, this is a picture of basically a pictograph of what coronavirus looks like, right? As I pointed out earlier, is that these spikes are very significant, right? These spikes are important because these are the proteins or parts of the virus that actually triggers the immune response. And the reason we know that is because of research that was done on SARS and MERS back in 2003 and 2012. So this is one of the reasons why we were so quickly able to develop vaccines, because we had this knowledge in our back pocket. So we knew that if you were able to show the body this spike protein, you would elicit a good immune response. And so now with genome technology, we're also able to locate which part of the virus RNA was responsible for coding these proteins. And so this becomes very important when we start developing our novel viral vector and mRNA vaccines. So let's start from the tried and true conventional vaccines. This is a whole virus vaccine. And what they do is they make it from coronavirus. They inactivate the coronavirus, and essentially they do it by chemically adding this agent called beta-propiolactone, and that basically kills off the COVID virus, so it's no longer infectious. But it maintains the integrity of your spike protein, so when it's injected into you as an immunization, then you can still elicit that immune response. And so inactivated vaccines have been around for centuries. The 1880s was when they first were developed. And so this has been around. This is how we typically give vaccines. Hep A is done this way. Rabies is also an inactivated virus vaccine, and as is pertussis. And so we give these to our kids all the time, and again, has been known to be effective and safe. And then what happens after the inactivated coronavirus is then in your body? Well, then your immune system sees it, and it basically then activates the humoral immunity process, where again it induces your B cell to start creating antibodies that are specific to coronavirus, and it also induces cellular adaptive immunity. And this is where the antigen, the inactivated coronavirus, is now engulfed by what's called the antigen presenting cells, and they digest the proteins, and guess what? They present out the spike protein, which then our helper T cell recognizes, and essentially can, next time it sees a spike protein, it can jump into action and provide you with a degree of immunity. And so it activates both arms of our immune system, both the humoral immunity and the cellular adaptive immunity. And then how does that immunity then work? Well, you have these antibodies, which typically what the scientists are looking for to see how effective COVID is the COVID vaccine is they're looking at neutralizing antibodies, right? And so then we are still able to detect neutralizing antibodies. And what they do is they basically attach to the virus and they prevent it from infecting your cells and infecting you potentially. And then your T cells, that's your adaptive immunity, and that identifies COVID infected cells and then destroys them. And so that's why, again, you have immunity when you are presented with natural infection of COVID, and you likely will then be able to jumpstart your immune system and not get as sick as if you were not vaccinated. And so now let's jump over to, these are our newer vaccines. So this is viral vector vaccines. And basically you're tricking the body to creating an immune response to, guess what, the spike proteins. So this is one of the newer vaccine platforms. It was previously used in 2014. They created it to make the Ebola vaccine. And so they use a virus called adenovirus. Most of you know adenovirus, it can cause a cold, it can cause conjunctivitis. But they alter the adenovirus so it's non-pathogenic. Then they essentially use this adenovirus as a Trojan horse to deliver a code. In this case, it's DNA, and they deliver this code into vaccinated cells to eventually make spike proteins. This approach is essentially been used by now the vaccines that are created by Johnson & Johnson, by AstraZeneca, as well as the Gamaleya, the Russian vaccine. And so they use different types of adenovirus. So Gamaleya, the Russian vaccine, is very interesting because it uses two different types of adenovirus. So it uses AD26 for the first vaccine and uses AD5 for the second vaccine, which they think actually enhances its efficacy and its ability to increase immunogenicity. Whereas the other vaccines, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, just use one type of adenovirus. And so this is what happens. Your adenovirus enters the vaccinated cell now, and then it delivers the DNA to the cell nucleus, which then goes from, if you remember from biology, goes from DNA to mRNA. And then from mRNA, it uses the cell's machinery and factory, the ribosomes, to create spike proteins, which then presents out. And then the same story in terms of creating your humoral immunity and your cellular adaptive immunity. And that's how it then works in terms of making you immune to infection down the line. And then we have our last more novel type of vaccine. These are our mRNA vaccines. And so these were also leveraged our genome technology to provoke an immune response. And so again, because of decades of genomic research, in one weekend in January 2020, when they first were able to identify the coronavirus, the novel SARS-CoV-2, scientists were able to sequence the genetic code or mRNA that was responsible for creating the spike protein. And so once they published this genetic code of the novel coronavirus, in less than a month, they had an mRNA vaccine ready to go, because they already knew that you couldn't just deliver mRNA by itself. It's too unstable. This is why it requires ultra code chain storage. It degrades very quickly. That's an inherent property of mRNA. So they use nanotechnology, and then they could encase the mRNA unstable with lipid nanoparticles in order to ensure that it was stable enough so that once it's injected, it can get to your muscle cells and do what? Do exactly what all the other ones are doing. Go into the cell, the vaccinated cell, use the ribosomes, create the spike proteins, and elicit your immune response. Great. So how effective are they, right? In terms of are all the vaccines equal? So as we know, they are not in terms of effectiveness from symptomatic COVID. So meaning that you could still get infected, but you may have very mild or asymptomatic cases. And this is why people with COVID can still get infected after vaccination. It's not 100% by any means. There are definitely still cases of breakthrough infection. And so as you can see, Pfizer and Moderna, when they came out with their data, it was more than anybody had actually thought that it would be. It was up at 94 to 95% protection from symptomatic COVID. COVID Gamaleya, for the Sputnik 5 from Russia, was up at 92%. That's the one that uses the 2 different adenovirus vectors. AstraZeneca up at 70%, Janssen 66%, and Sinovac 50%. And so Sinovac has gotten a lot of flack for being so low. This is what the threshold is to get WHO approvals. You have to have at least 50% efficacy. Right now, our flu vaccines, that's where they stand. Flu vaccines are about 50% efficacious. Other studies done in Brazil have shown this efficacy, or not Brazil, in, where was it? Somewhere near Brazil, but I can't remember exactly which country it was, closer to 90%. Turkey, that's what it was. In Turkey, they did studies and it was closer to 92%. So a lot of variability there. But for some reason, one of the numbers that people don't look at or don't seem to publish a lot is the effectiveness at preventing severe disease and hospitalization. And so when you look at that, this is why, again, vaccination is so important. So you might get a little bit sick, you might get asymptomatic or mild infection, but what all the vaccines are very good at doing is preventing severe disease and hospitalization. And so that's why when anyone asks me if they should wait for the vaccine, I typically tell them, no, you should get what is available at this point in time, but because it can prevent you from dying. You might get infected, but your likelihood of dying is much, much less likely. And so now what about all these variants that are circulating? How effective is our vaccine against that? That's what we tend to hear a lot about now. So when they looked at the vaccine performance for our mRNA vaccines, when variants were circulating, that they were still preventing infection. So in the US, among 84 million vaccinated, less than 6,000 reports of breakthrough infection. And then when you kind of take it to a more global perspective, including all the other vaccines, including AstraZeneca and Sinovac, and then now looking at the table cross-referencing the B117, which is the UK variant, the B1351, which is South Africa, and then P1, which is Brazil, is, as you can see, for the UK variant, still same efficacy. right, for all of the vaccines down the line. Again, reduced for South Africa, which can be concerning, and which is why we have to be invested in getting everyone vaccinated, not just our own countries. And then same thing with the Brazil variant in terms of reduced efficacy for J&J and also for Sinovac. But Pfizer is faring well, as is AstraZeneca. And then there's this, this has been what's been really quite worrisome in the past couple of weeks is the B1617 variant, and that's in India. And that really, I think, is partially responsible for a lot of the death and cases that's occurring there now. And this is also known as what's called the double mutant. So it actually contains 15 mutations, but 2 of the mutations have been identified previously. One in a California variant, which conferred increased transmissibility and contagiousness. Then also a mutation that's found in the South African variant. And this is what's dubbed the escape mutation, because it seems to help the virus from partially evading immunity conferred by prior infection or vaccine. So this is very troubling. We do have there are cases that have been found in 20 other countries thus far, and 20 cases have been found in California, but it has not seemed to have spread beyond that at this point in time, but definitely something to be aware of. And again, one of the reasons why we have to emphasize vaccination, not just for our local area, but abroad and globally as well, to ensure that down the line that we don't end up having problems with the variants down the line and our vaccines don't work. So the question is, will the virus variants circulating in the US mean that we need a booster, right? In terms of, will we need to get another vaccine? So really, we don't know yet. It is really a race between vaccination and the variants. Variants are created when there's replication, then mutation of the virus. If we have very high vaccination rates in our communities, then the virus has no one to infect, cannot replicate, cannot mutate, and then we won't have to get a booster dose. But again, we still don't know for sure what that's going to look like. The other question I often get is, so are we now going to have COVID vaccines yearly, like the flu? So again, it really depends on that mutation rate of the virus. For example, the flu has a very high mutation rate, so that's why we have to get the yearly flu shots. Measles is also an RNA vaccine, but it has a low mutation rate. And so that's why we can get the vaccine when we were kids and we don't ever need a booster again. Right now, COVID seems to be somewhere in between flu and measles. So it might be like other vaccines like tetanus where we need every 10 years, but right now we don't know. A lot of it will depend on how we end up being able to vaccinate the rest of the world. Novavax, I just want to mention, is one of the companies actually trialing a vaccine that is both for flu and COVID. And so down the line, I'm sure that that could potentially be another option. So now this is the big question. We talked about efficacy, that again, they're all great, especially in terms of decreasing the likelihood of severe COVID, of death, of hospitalization, but are they safe? And this is actually one of the first questions they ask before even thinking about efficacy. So as you can see, these again is a repeat slide of the leading vaccines, and they all go through trials essentially. So they're approved by, we know that the ones that are approved by regulatory bodies are safe because they go through a rigorous scientific review looking at the vaccine safety, efficacy, and quality. They test the vaccine on thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers before approval. And so this is sort of what it looks like. I just wanted to have you guys be familiar with the vaccine development process. And so typically, again, there's research of actually making the vaccines, and then you start with phase 1 clinical studies, and that's basically asking if it's safe, and that's usually on a few dozens of folks. And then you go to, does it work? And essentially then that goes to even more people, and eventually you get to phase 3, clinical studies, is the vaccine safe and does it work? And now this is now thousands of volunteers that you are enlisting and recruiting. And then the FDA in the US is what looks at the data and approves the vaccine. And then the CDC looks at that, and then they continue to monitor as time goes on. And so this is, again, the typical timeline for vaccine development. Usually it occurs in steps and sequence, one after the other. And they typically don't start manufacturing until all of this is done. So that's why when we started this, everybody's like, oh, it's going to take, years to come up with a vaccine. But what they did was they allowed the studies to occur in parallel instead of in sequence. And that was really to save time. They engaged scientists and regulators. So they reviewed the data more quickly. And the independent bodies could get through the data in weeks instead of months. So they did not skip any steps. It just looked a little bit different in terms of running things in parallel as opposed to in sequence. And so this is what occurred in what they dub as pandemic speed. And medical experts and for us in the US, the regulatory bodies, the Food and Drug Administration, they oversee the entire vaccine approval process. Again, with COVID vaccine trials, researchers enrolled far more clinical trial participants than is usually required. So they enrolled tens of thousands of people. And the reason is so that they can notice and address safety concerns more easily and quickly. And so the vaccines have been tested in large randomized controlled trials that include people of broad age range, both sexes, different ethnicities, and those with known medical conditions. The vaccine has shown, as we mentioned, a high level efficacy across all the populations. And really they've been found to be safe and effective in people with various underlying medical conditions that are associated with increased risk of severe disease. And so issuing the EUA, or the emergency use authorization, shortened the official process, but it did not skip any safety steps. So this really is what allowed us to access vaccines sooner. Right now in the US, the only vaccine that has now applied for full FDA approval is the Pfizer vaccine. And what happens is once the Pfizer vaccine gets full FDA approval actually that's only when they're allowed to start marketing. So this is why you haven't seen commercials about getting the Pfizer vaccine, because they're not allowed to yet because it's still under emergency use authorization. But once they get that full FDA approval, I guarantee there will be some marketing coming out. And so with that, in terms of safety, the US set up a very robust data collection system in terms of VAERS Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System and vSafe, where you basically can register and report anything, any symptoms you have, any post-vaccination events. And really that's so that you create big data. And so if you have big data, then you can notice small changes in patterns that are occurring and whether you need to be worried or concerned. And so now over 1.34 billion shots have been given. That's a lot of shots. In the US, it's been about 263 million doses. And again, they have been generally safe with no serious side effects noted as of now after 1.3 billion shots. Typically, again, we worry mostly about immediate post-vaccination events like an allergy to the vaccine. We also know to expect short-term side effects within 48 to 72 hours of the vaccine. Side effects like arm soreness, headache, fatigue, fever. Typically, it means that your immune system is responding to the vaccine the way it should. For vaccines in general, because they do their thing, elicit an immune response, and then they degrade, scientists typically are not worried about long-term side effects. They're mostly looking at events that occur within 2 to 3 months after vaccination. So long-term side effects from vaccines in general are not an issue. So we did hear about, early on, the worry was anaphylaxis with the Pfizer vaccine. Again, now that we have much more data, it comes down to about 2.5 to 11 cases per million for mRNA vaccines. And AstraZeneca about 8 cases per million. Again, since we know about it, it's easy to be prepared. And make sure that we are watching people who are getting vaccinated for at least 15 minutes after their dose. And really, this has not shown increased risk of anaphylaxis above what the expected rate for other vaccines. And so again, as time goes on, then more data and very few severe allergic reactions. And then again, safety monitoring as data is reassuring. And then I think the other sort of headline news that hit was the J&J vaccine and the blood clots, right, associated with J&J and AstraZeneca is, I think, halting the J&J vaccine was evidence that our monitoring system worked. So only after 6 women were noted to have an unusual clotting event, cerebral venous thrombosis, they halted administration of vaccines. So only 6 out of 7 million doses, they were able to notice that pattern and say, hey, we need to stop, we need to look at the data. And so essentially that's what happened in, I think they paused it on April 13th and they resumed it on April 23rd. Again, with a warning saying this is something to look out for. If you are having any headache, abdominal pain, leg pain within 2 weeks of your vaccine, please see your physician. And again, it was isolated then to 15 cases, all in women. Again, where they looked at then the risk estimation, where it was highest in those who were younger, 11.8 million for the ages 30 to 39, but for men and women over 50, less than a case per million doses. And so again, after reviewing all the data, they looked at the risk benefit as they do for, all of these vaccines. And again, that you are more likely, it was in the same period that it would cause maybe 26 to 45 clots in a 6-month period, it would have prevented 1,400 deaths from COVID. And so again, you get clots from COVID as well, where clearly then the benefit of the vaccine outweighed the risk. And so in the end, it was resumed. And so other characteristics of the vaccine that need to consider for country programs, again, ultra cold chain, and -80 to -60. So our hospital had purchased special freezers in September of 2020, anticipating that we were going to be vaccinating in December or January, and we would be ready for Pfizer when it came out. Again, for rest of warm weather climates, it's the vaccines that require regular refrigeration are much more feasible and both logistically and cost-wise. And in terms of cost, this is another big factor in terms of which vaccines go where, right? Where you're thinking, when you're talking about a vaccination program to scale, where you have a $1 difference, that's $1 million difference when you're talking about a population of 1 million people, right? And as you can see, AstraZeneca is down at $3 to $4 per dose, whereas Moderna is up at $37 per dose. And so this can be really will be a huge factor in determining which countries can get which vaccines. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit to the physician role in a vaccination program. And so really it can be very varied, where you are putting on not just your doctor hat, but your public health and implementation hat. So, and really it's not just a physician. Our team was very multidisciplinary in terms of, we had a nurse manager, we had IT on board, we had a lot of HR and communications folks. But really it was about, in order to succeed, we really need to make sure that we established effective communication and supply chain and data management systems very early on. We intentionally and deliberately strategized to combat and mitigate vaccine hesitancy. where, you know, just because you have the vaccine doesn't necessarily mean that people will want it, that you really have to combat those conspiracy theories online early on. Kat will talk about the widely circulating myths that are on Facebook and on Instagram and on all the social media platforms. We also centralize our approach, hosting mass vaccination events to help get the majority of people vaccinated, and then we decentralize, knowing that the local community approach would be really important to get those who are more hesitant and cautious. Getting a vaccine from your peer as opposed to going to a big auditorium or big mass vaccination site was more convincing for people to get vaccines than if you have sort of the less personal approach. We applied lean principles where really we were constantly using quality and process improvement methodology, including capturing data so you can always adjust your operations. And then we tried to really integrate our process into established platforms to strengthen the current system. And then patience and persistence. Oftentimes it was only after the 4th or 5th time that I would ask a staff member to get vaccinated that they would say, okay, Dr. Ferrer. And then if I would ask Kat to ask them, then they would definitely say yes. And again, this is another one of my roles as one of the physicians was really guidance for vaccine prioritization, where again, if you have that limited supply, you have to pick who's gonna get it. You know, for us, we had 8,000 employees. We had to pick the first 750 staff members to get it. And again, we really used an ethical framework in order to create the algorithm and make the decisions. So really maximum benefit, minimize harm, promoting justice, and mitigating health inequities. Can't understate the importance of data management. Is in the beginning, we really needed to track meaningful metrics to help with scale up, to be very intentional and deliberate about what you're collecting, because again, if you're doing it at scale, you can't collect everything. And then on the front end, we use a vaccine planning tool so that we could figure out how much supply and demand we had. So if it'd be interesting to see what your survey would say if it was 5 months ago. How many people would say, yes, I want the vaccine. So that's what we did. We had 5,000 of our staff fill out a survey, and 65% of our staff said, yes, I want the vaccine in the next 30 days. So, and the other 35% were like, nope, I'm gonna wait. We also understood the historical context of vaccine hesitancy. And so of those 5,000 people, 65% said yes. Of those 65% who said yes, then only 11% were Black. So we knew that we had work cut out first, and we had to address that disparity. Actually, at some point in time with this data, we were able to perform these gap analysis by ethnicity, job, family, unit, and cadre. At some point in time, we noticed that there were a lot of Asians in the operating room who were not getting vaccinated. And I knew they were the Filipino nurses. And so that's when I enlisted Kat to say, hey, I'm going to use you as a trusted messenger. And she actually did a phenomenal job to increase the vaccination rates because of that personal touch. Very important having that personal connection. So this was like a dashboard this is our dashboard where we've gotten up to 75% vaccination rate for our hospital. And again, I can analyze it by department, by job. We do it by gender, we do it by ethnicity, really so that you could then target the under-vaccinated folks and figure out how you can get to them and get them vaccinated. And that's where, again, effective communication strategy, incredibly key, where public relations communication team was really critical to us building trust, providing ongoing updates for transparency so they knew who we were picking, why we were picking them, and what the process was going to be. Again, knowing the context of vaccine hesitancy, which Dr. Moreno will talk more about in the setting of the Philippines, and then really facilitating easy access to information, reducing barriers for everyone. So again, not doing everything on Zoom. We had in-person huddles. We would do flyers. We would do, old school posters. And then really, I think the most critical aspect, which is why all of you are here, is really to create this network of trusted messengers, champions, and ambassadors. Everybody who's been vaccinated, every single healthcare worker can be an ambassador, and basically leveraging your social capital, leveraging your social networks in order to provide information so that people can make wise decisions. And it has huge ripple effects, down the line to increase vaccination rates for the community. And so with that, I know I'm a little bit over time, but I definitely wanted to hand it over to Kat. And I think this is a great part of the segment of the webinar, because she's going to give you talking points. Like, people are going to say, well, this is why I don't want to get the vaccine. And this is what I heard on Facebook. This is what my cousin said. This is what my tita said. But she will give you good talking points as to how to counter those myths that are out there. We know they're there. And so it's important that you are able to do it confidently and do it quickly in order to ensure that people get the right information.
Absolutely. Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Graham, and I've worked very closely with Dr. Ferrer at Children's National Hospital with a vaccine program. We were vaccinating employees there, and it's not as easy as people think it may be. So there's a lot involved when it comes to setting up a vaccine clinic at the hospital. We had to call employees, make appointments, and made sure that they are able to return for their second vaccine, which was hard because we always had people making excuses. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't come because I'm not available. I'm off that day. I can't come in to work. And employees are screened prior to vaccination to make sure that they are eligible. And not only do we have vaccinators, but we also have an observer that monitor employees for adverse or allergic reactions after being vaccinated. I wanted to discuss the myths with regards to the COVID vaccine and provide you with simple facts tonight in hopes that you are can fully understand, the truth. And there's so many misinformation and conspiracies about the vaccine that has easily spread, as fast as chismes or rumors can be spread at a Filipino party. So I'm going to start out. Let's start debunking. Let's start the debunking process. So myth number one, the vaccine is not safe because it was rapidly developed and tested. And the fact is, just like I'm just reiterating basically what Dr. Ferrer had said in her presentation earlier, that due to that pandemic, the emergency situation warranted an emergency response, but doesn't mean that the companies bypassed safety protocols or didn't perform adequate testing. Some types of COVID vaccines were created using messenger RNA, which allows for a faster approach than the traditional way that vaccines are made. The technology, as Dr. Ferrer has mentioned, has been in development for years. So companies could start the vaccine development process early in the pandemic. Folks, people are dying, by the thousands, every day. And this is why the vaccine, they allowed scientists to work really hard to perform these adequate testings. For myth number two, the COVID-19 vaccine can affect women's fertility. And the fact is, the genetic code, which is the placenta protein, and the COVID-19 proteins are not similar. There is no evidence to show that the vaccine can reduce fertility. And actually, contracting COVID while pregnant carries a much higher risk than getting than getting vaccinated. Higher risk for developing hypertension and pneumonia, increase the need for mechanical ventilation, to maternal death, and preterm to stillbirth. Myth number 3. The vaccine will alter my DNA. COVID-19 vaccines do not change or interact with your DNA in any way. Both the mRNA and viral vector vaccines deliver instructions, which is the genetic material, to our cells to start building protection against the virus that causes the COVID. But the material never enters the nucleus of the cell, which is where the DNA is kept. Therefore, it does not change our DNA in any way. Myth number 4. I already had COVID-19. I don't need a vaccine. We actually get this myth a lot with the employees that I've come across at Children's. The fact is, vaccines may offer better protection than natural infection. Evidence suggests that natural immunity from COVID-19 may not last very long. We don't know how long the antibodies can last in your bodies. Not enough information is available to say how long after an infection someone is protected. And myth number 5. The vaccine was developed with or contains controversial substances. Now, the fact is, ingredients in the first 2 vaccines authorized by the FDA contain mRNA, fats, which protects the mRNA, salts, as well as a small amount of sugar. It does not contain fetal tissue or baby body parts, and does not contain any tracking devices or microchips, as they've been talked about on social media or any platforms. Honestly, if the government wants you to, if they're already pretty much tracking us by the use of our phones. I mean, if you guys think about it, our phones, they know where you are, they know what you're looking for. You know, you can talk about an advertisement, you can talk about something, and boom, an advertisement shows up on your phone with whatever it is that you're talking about. So just letting you know that there is no tracking devices in the vaccines. Myth number 6, the side effects of the vaccine are dangerous. Fact is, the vast majority of the side effects are very short term, and they're not serious or dangerous. Common side effects include, very most common is a pain in the injection site, body aches, headaches, fevers, chills, fatigue, and symptoms usually last a day or 2. And myth number 7, getting the COVID-19 vaccine means I can stop wearing my mask and taking coronavirus precautions. So the vaccines do not stop the coronavirus from entering the body. They can only prevent you from developing moderate or to severe COVID. Even after being fully vaccinated, it can take up to 2 weeks to be fully protected. However, nothing is 100%. So when you are fully vaccinated, it lowers your risks of spreading the disease. And myth number 8, young people don't need to be vaccinated. Though people over 65 are much more likely to get severely ill from a coronavirus infection, keep in mind young people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s are still getting hospitalized. Young people still die of COVID. Unvaccinated people can easily get infected and spread it to someone, especially people that are more vulnerable or with compromised immune systems. And young people can experience a range of symptoms that can last for weeks or months after infection. According to the CDC, symptoms can include brain fog, fatigue, headache, dizziness, heart palpitations, chest pain, depression, anxiety, and beyond. Myth number 9, getting the COVID vaccine gives you COVID. The fact is, vaccines do not contain the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The 2 authorized mRNA vaccines instruct our cells to reproduce a protein that is part of the SARS-CoV virus, coronavirus. This protein helps your immune system recognize and fight the virus, but does not cause any infection of any sort. And myth number 10, I am allergic to eggs, so I shouldn't get the COVID-19 vaccine. The fact is, COVID vaccines do not contain any eggs, nor eggs were used in the development or production of either vaccine, unlike the flu vaccine. However, those with severe allergic reactions to eggs or any other substances are encouraged to remain for 30 minutes for observation after being vaccinated. So those are the 10 most commonly myths that have been circulating. And if you guys have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, it will be later, Cathy. Our next speaker is Dr. Ramon Moreno, who will be talking about vaccine hesitancy in the Philippines. Dr. Moreno? Oh. Dr. Moreno? Let's see. Dr. Moreno.
Is he making rounds?
Please unmute your okay.
Yeah, good morning again from the Philippines, and good evening there in Washington. Indeed, I am honored and very thankful for your invitation for us to join in this webinar. I just have I would like to acknowledge first some personnels there in your great state of Washington. Thank you to Dr. Natalie Kion, the president of the PMADC, Lourdes Carriaga, outgoing president of the PNADC, Carol Robles, incoming president of the PNADC, Aida Imperio, the chair of education, acknowledgement to Alice Andam, who was the past president of the PNADC, who visited Northern Mindanao for their Surigao medical mission. So thank you, Joy, for your kind introduction.
Welcome.
And kindly share my slides, please. Can you share my slides, please?
I don't have the slides, Dr. Moreno.
Who has the slides?
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so
yeah, thank you. There you go. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Madam Host, is it okay now?
Yes, if you put it on
Yes. So,
slideshow.
okay na.
Yes.
So, our pandemic journey in Cagayan de Oro, Philippines, has been a year already. We started the journey of our pandemic situation on March 13, 2020, when we had our first mortality here in northern Mindanao. And a year after, March 4, that's the first vaccination ever conducted here in Cagayan de Oro. So almost after a year from that's the time that we receive our first vaccination for the healthcare workers. So that's our journey. And this slide shows that the virus hates community or who are collaborating, and the community that help each other, the virus really hates that. But when in the community, when people hang out together and without regard for the minimum health care, they eat together, laugh and sing together, that's when the virus love it very much. So first slide. So what we would like to achieve really is for the global herd immunity. And this is achieved when there is indirect protection from a contagious infectious disease that happens when a population is immune either through vaccination, immunity developed through previous infection, and when there is 60% of the population is vaccinated, then herd immunity is achieved, so that the people around the community buffer each other, and there is immunity from the contagious disease. An example of that is the smallpox and even polio disease. So strong leaders, we really need strong leaders for the vaccination to be carried out, or is it because of empowered citizen in the community? So whichever, these are two factors I believe that can really implement a better vaccination outcome. So a strong leader, empowered citizen. So my role really here in this webinar is to share the Cagayan de Oro experience. And we had our first vaccination on March 4, 2021, the first vaccination rollout for healthcare workers. We used the Sinovac vaccine. Then on April 6 to 11 this year, we had our second dose of Sinovac. On April 29, we started our vaccination for senior citizens. And we had, in the city, there are only 4 vaccination areas. For those of you who know Cagayan de Oro, we have the SM Mall downtown. That's one vaccination area. Then the JRB General Hospital, the City Health Office, and Barangay Bulwa. These are the only 4 vaccination areas. And the target is 1,500 vaccination per day. So our vaccines that are available are the Sinovac and the AstraZeneca. The raw data that we have from 2 government hospitals the Northern Mindanao Medical Center, which is the largest government hospital in the region of Northern Mindanao, there are a total of 1,701 healthcare workers, and there are 1,579 personnel who were vaccinated for a total of 91.7% vaccination rate. Then here in our hospital, in the J.R. Borja General Hospital, there are a total of 966 personnel, and we have a percentage rate of 92.7%. The rundown is there's only one doctor who was not vaccinated, of the 75, and the reason for this is the unwillingness to be vaccinated. Then there are 26 nurses who are also not vaccinated, and 3 of these nurses are pregnant. Then the remainder, 42 personnel, comes from the administrative and finance. So there's only a total of 69 not vaccinated out of 966. So there is a trend that I think in the US you mentioned about 89% vaccination rate. So we are a little bit higher. For the seniors, since the start of the vaccination for seniors, there are only 4,985 seniors who were vaccinated out of a projected 75,000 in the city. So the challenges that we have in the city is that there is really a lack of vaccine supply, because we could have maximized our output if there were only vaccines that were available. And the vaccine schedules were not followed. No, this pertains to the senior citizen. They do not follow the text message that they receive, that if they are scheduled at 8 o'clock, then they come sometimes at 9 or 10 o'clock. And so when the queuing is filled up, they will be lumped up at 12 o'clock. So the vaccination gets to be, there will be overtime. We go up to 7 o'clock just to finish the vaccination process. So it's a loaded affair for our personnel. And another challenge, this is for seniors specifically, because we are still on the seniors. I often get problems like seniors forget their date of vaccination, and some seniors, they never bother to open their messages. So these are some of the feedbacks I got. Then also deferred cases due to comorbidities like hypertension. They have one thing I don't understand is when they are there in the vaccination queuing, their blood pressure rises up. When they would say that I have a normal blood pressure, but when here in the vaccination area, their blood pressure rises up. Maybe they're afraid or they have some fear. So these are some problems we encounter. And how we would like to have additional vaccination centers and make the vaccine available closer to the community. So these are our challenges. I think that's all my slides for our Cagayan de Oro experience. These are 2 doctor and a patient.
Thank you, Dr. Moreno. And now we are open for
Second
question
dose
and
of
answers.
vaccine, Doc. She seems to be happy.
Joy?
So, yeah, may I just finish it up and share the Jerbora General Hospital desires to complement your human resource logistics in Northern Mindanao in the safe future. So,
Muted.
Oh, I don't know.
Dr. Moreno, you're muted. Why is he mute?
I don't know.
Ida.
I don't know why he is muted, but thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. And now we are open for question and answers. Joy?
Yeah, the chat box has been very busy with all praises and good remarks for our speakers. So let's go to the first question. It's coming from Mylene from Australia. She said there's a lot of concern here in Australia regarding the risk of thrombosis with the thrombocytopenic syndrome related to AstraZeneca. Should we be worried? And the second question she has, if the first dose is AstraZeneca, is it okay to have Pfizer for the second dose? Would you recommend mixing brands or stick to same brand AstraZeneca? I think this is a question for Dr. Cathy Ferrer.
Sure. Thanks. Great, Eileen. And so the first question in terms of AstraZeneca and I think what you're referring to is the heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Again, the concern with both AstraZeneca and with Johnson & Johnson was this cerebral sinus venous thrombosis, where it was not just the clotting, but also the combination with thrombocytopenia or low platelets. So that combination typically is not seen, where if you give heparin, which you typically would do for clotting, you might kill the person, right? Because they also have this thrombocytopenia. And so that's why it gained a lot of notoriety, really. And I think what they did in some of the approval regulatory bodies, what they did was they put a contraindication. So if you've ever had heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, you're not eligible for the vaccine. If you ever had any type of a blood clot with the first dose, you weren't then supposed to get the second dose of AstraZeneca. And then some countries have said that they're not going to use Johnson & Johnson, for example, and other places have said that if you have a vaccine choice, then again, we know that the risk seems to be higher in women and younger women. So you have a choice between vaccines, then you should not get then Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca. You should then get one of the other vaccines if that choice is made available. But when they did the overall public health analysis of it, they did not think that it warranted the basically stopping all vaccinations, but they just added warnings to it. And so that's, I think, where all of that concern is coming from. In terms of mixing and matching, that's what they're calling the vaccines, of getting AstraZeneca and then getting Pfizer later on, that they're actually doing studies on that in terms of saying, is that going to increase efficacy down the line? I think they're taking a cue from that Russian vaccine that used the two different adenoviruses as the viral vector. Where if you just use the one adenovirus 26 as the vector, then the Sputnik vaccine actually achieved an efficacy rate of 79% for symptomatic against symptomatic COVID. And then if you do the ad 26 plus the other viral vector, the ad 5, then that's what raised it up to 92%. So when that came out, they're like, well, maybe that should be a strategy we use. And so certainly I think they're looking at that. And cost-wise, again, it's cheaper to get an AstraZeneca and a Pfizer than to get two Pfizers, or I'm sure that countries are going to be looking at in terms of their strategy down the line. Again, one of the big feasibility problems with Pfizer, though, is the fact that it needs that cold chain of the -60 to 80 degrees, and you can take it out of negative 60 to 80 degrees for a total of 5 days. And once you break that bile, you have 6 hours to use the vaccine. If you don't use the vaccine, then you're going to waste a dose. Believe me and Kat spent many hours roaming the hospital floor saying, we have an extra dose, we need to use it, and in the next you want a vaccine. And so again, that's another consideration when countries are trying to implement vaccine programs at scale, where again, Pfizer is more difficult just because of all the logistical barriers.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Mylene. So as a follow-up here, after the second dose, Edwin followed this up, like he didn't get any side effects. So does that mean it is less effective to those who had it?
Nope. So that there has not been any correlation in terms of the effectiveness of the vaccine and side effects. They've looked at it in terms of when they look at vaccine efficacy, they also look at, they actually will draw your blood all the time to look at your neutralizing antibody and look at that T cell immunity. And they didn't see that there's a correlation between getting side effects and efficacy at all. So even if you didn't have any side effects, that doesn't mean that it didn't work. And what they showed was people who are not, I'm not saying that you're older, but older folks tended to not get many vaccines as younger folks. Younger folks tend to have more side effects, we think, because they have a more robust immune response. Because my parents as well, they also were like, we didn't get any side effects. And I definitely had side effects after my first and second dose.
Okay.
I didn't have any, just to share that, but a bruised arm.
Okay. So again, a question for Dr. Ferrer. Hang on, I'm sorry. This thing came about.
I see. I'm still using convalescent plasma for COVID with the availability of vaccines. So we haven't used as much. And again, being in a pediatric hospital, our highest census for pediatric COVID was 17. So again, the kids just aren't affected as much as adults. So, you know, since I didn't practice in an adult hospital, I did not have a lot of COVID experience in terms of treating COVID in adults. But I believe that the convalescent plasma use has definitely gone down. A lot of what we are using is monoclonal antibody in terms of getting people monoclonal antibody when they're mild to moderate symptoms, and especially the criteria is if they're at risk for severe disease. And that we have shown, again, anecdotally from a lot of the employees that we talk to, that once they get that monoclonal antibody, they seem to go down pretty quickly, because our average amount of time out for COVID infection would be for, like, especially our nurses, they would be out for at least 19 days from work. So that's a lot of absenteeism for a hospital. So certainly now we're seeing a huge effect in terms of, now that we have vaccinated a lot of our staff, in terms of decreased isolation and decreased absenteeism for our staff in general.
Okay, thank you. I believe this one will be for Dr. Moreno from Dr. Cathy. It's a question about, she actually complement the amazing vaccination rate that you just reported. And that was 75% better than the US for sure. And that's just Cagayan de Oro. The question is, will it be made mandatory for healthcare workers? So we noticed there was quite a lag with one doctor out of 75, and the nurses as well, and the administrative staff. Dr. Moreno, do you think it will be made mandatory for healthcare workers?
Thank you for the question. In the Philippines, it's still a democratic country, so we really cannot make it mandatory. We still, the individual right is still there. There is no executive order that is still executed, no? So we still have to respect the individual right. So, but I think we have a very good vaccination rate. Imagine one doctor. I wouldn't want to say the gender, but that's the right of the individual. And nurses too, they have a good rate also for the nurses. I think there are only 26 out of 329 nurses, so it's a good rate.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yes, thank you.
That's interesting because here in the US, hospitals are probably going to make it mandatory for healthcare workers to be employed, is my guess. As soon as we get FDA approval, there's, in terms of there's no reason not to make it mandatory. In terms of you have a choice of you either have to get vaccinated or you have to have a medical exemption for not getting vaccinated. There's already a hospital in Texas that has made it mandatory for all their employees to get vaccinated.
Okay, so here's a question from Canada, from Mila. How effective will the vaccine be if the second dose is delayed to 16 weeks instead of 4 weeks, which was the recommendation from CDC? Apparently in Canada, except for healthcare workers who were prioritized to receive the vaccine, second dose is given 16 weeks later for the general population.
Yeah, so we don't think that it's going to change the efficacy. It just means that you're more vulnerable for those weeks that you haven't been vaccinated. We think 2 weeks after you get that second vaccine, you will still achieve that 95% efficacy rate. And really, I think that, again, the Canada did it, the UK did it really for the public health benefits. But certainly then after that first dose, your efficacy is only at, I think 70 something percent. And then again, it's only after your second dose that you get up to that 95%. So it doesn't change your ability to get up to that 95%, even though it's been 16 weeks since your last dose.
Okay. Again, one question for Dr. Moreno. What do you think is the reasoning for increasing the 10-day quarantine in the Philippines for traveling balikbayans and foreigners?
I believe now there's a new guideline. I'm not very sure, but what I am getting, people from the US, from abroad, there's only a 3-day clearance. I'm not sure now, but it has lessened, and even there are now. I'm not just sure, but there's now a direct from abroad. When they land at Manila, they can proceed to their provincial destination right away. But this is not. I'm not really sure about it, but it has definitely decreased. No longer 10 days.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we are running out of time. So all those questions that we have not addressed, we will try to get back to you. And Ida?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno, Dr. Cathy Ferrer, and Catherine Graham for the excellent presentation. And now for our closing, we have Dr. Mary Joy Dia, the PNAA president.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ida Imperio, and of course, Ms. Joy Arellano. On behalf of the Philippine Nurses Association of America, we appreciate your chapter in providing this forum for our Filipino-American community, not only here in the United States, but globally. We have a lot of participation coming from Canada, Australia, and of course, from our home country, the Philippines. Each time I listen to the scientific information presented, I gain more confidence that I made the right decision to get vaccinated despite my existing health condition, as I have been an asthmatic since I was on my 5th grade. I am amazed how the advent of genetics and genomics have been instrumental in facilitating the clinical trials and the rapid development of the vaccines by various pharmaceutical companies. Thank you so much for that information provided by Dr. Cathy Ferrer. Similar to other medications, there are expected side effects, but the benefits outweigh the risks. Although there are algorithms in determining the prioritization on who gets the vaccine. And we know there are barriers and health disparities that exists, particularly in underrepresented community. We are hopeful that with this type of forum, we will continue to inform and influence policies that would help alleviate these disparities, not only here in the United States, but also globally, because this is a global health issue and concern. Nurses are the most trusted professional for the past 18 years. We have seen the impact of COVID-19 since last year, and it continues to affect many of us up to today. These are the facts as presented by Catherine. There are over 32 million cases of COVID-19 here in the United States. So amongst our audience here, raise your hand if you know someone who died of COVID or got sick of COVID-19 and or have recovered from COVID-19 and still continue to have residual symptoms such as brain fog or respiratory issues. My question is, do you want to be the trusted messenger after hearing Catherine's facts versus myth presentation? What I know is that this is our shot to protect our family, our community, and ourselves. I want to see my parents. I have been FaceTiming them from the Philippines since last year, and I want to have that chance to at least hug them again. COVID-19 showed us that our life is short, and we are all vulnerable unless we take the action now. Let us clear the path forward and embrace a better new normal where we can reach herd immunity, not only here in the United States, but also globally, particularly in our home country. Let us continue to advocate for our Filipino-American communities. Maraming salamat. We appreciate everyone's presence tonight, and we want to wish all the nurses Happy Nurses Week month celebration. Happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Maayong gabi sa inyong tanan, maayong aga sa mga taga-Pilipinas. Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Mary Jane.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you po.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone from Cagayan de Oro. Thank you very much. all.
Thank you, Mamo.
Thank you.
It
I
was-
mean,
For joining us.
whoever can stay, so we can settle if
Good to
that's
see
okay.
you. You all
Carol.
look great. You all look great.
Ma'am,
Maybe this pandemic is making you look younger.
Yes.
Hello,
Dr.
Alice.
yeah. When are you coming?
We're
Oh,
waiting.
With
When you will take away the virus there, when things will be clear. Nice to see you, Ma'am Alice.
Okay.
Dr.
Thank
Moreno, we kind of didn't hear your wishes because you got muted.
I think you muted yourself because we did not mute you.
What happened? What was your wish?
The wish. Mayor Borja will be very much willing to complement the human resource if ever you will be visiting Northern Mindanao. We will be very delighted to complement the human resource.
Meaning a medical mission?
Yeah, if ever you come to visit again Northern Mindanao, we are much willing to, and we guarantee you we are fully vaccinated.
I wish we could not plan yet as of the moment because of our COVID. Yeah.
Okay, that's a long shot. No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself. This is just socialization now.
Yes,
Nothing serious. So
questions for everything.
Yeah.
thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Ferrer, Kathy Graham, Dr. Moreno. It's great to see you.
Thank you guys for inviting me and having me here.
That was a good one, Kat.
I feel very honored. I was so nervous. I'm so mad at myself because I didn't even share my stories. I'm like, oh, I didn't even share my stories. I was so nervous.
You can share it in part 2. We'll have a part 2.
We'll have a part 2. It's her first time, but you did very well.
Yeah, thank you. I was so nervous. I want to redeem myself.
You did great.
Hi, Jean.
Hi, thank you, Ida, for inviting us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks for
I'm glad you
attending,
all-
Mads.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mads. I
Hi,
appreciate you
Mads.
being here.
Thank you guys. It's past my bedtime.
Everyone's
Hi,
past their
Maddie.
bedtime.
Good job,
Hi,
Ida.
G.
Yes.
Some people.
Congratulations to the organizers. Congratulations to the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
Good job. Good job.
everyone. Thank you, Doc
Bye-bye.
Moreno.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Good night.
Thank you,
Ferrer
Doc
and Dr.
Moreno.
Thank you.
See you again.
Bye-bye. Sure,
Bye.
yeah.
Bye.
Likewise.
Bye, Joy. Bye.
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 Jean.
Bye, everyone.
Hello to Tete.
Good night.
Bye to my classmates.
Bye,
Thank you for
Marichu.
Good night.
supporting us. Angie.
Hi.
Thank you.
That was very good, Dr. Ferrer.
I know.
Yeah, I
That
think.
was great.
Yeah.
And
Arlene.
Kathy.
Arlene, those are all from children's. Arlene is there. I think she's at work or.
Yeah, because she's wearing a mask. Is it? Or is it just a.
Yeah. That's a picture, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Marisa got her picture too.
Yeah.
I know. We'll see. We're supposed to go to Camiguin for
Hi,
medical
Lenny.
mission, but
Not yet.
okay. All right.
Hey, I'm ending
Good
the
night,
meeting.
everybody. It's already late.
Good night.
Thank you, Ida. Thank you,
Good night.
Good
Hi,
night.
Greg.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Lourdes.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Joy.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Night.
Night.
Congrats. Thank
Night,
you.
Night,
Lords.
Chen.
Yes.
I learned